We will hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq.
That's the U.S. President Barack Obama last night laying out details of what he calls his comprehensive plan to take down ISIS. The president says there will be no combat troops on the ground, but his strategy to fight the militant group will include more airstrikes in Iraq and also, he says, inside Syria. He's also calling for a broad coalition of countries to join the fight against ISIS. This from a president who got elected saying he would end the war in Iraq. Well, they're back. Canada has deployed dozens of special forces to Iraq to serve as military advisors, but now, in the wake of the Obama strategy, is Canada prepared to do more? What role should Canada play in the international fight against ISIS? Joining me now by Skype from Toronto, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Defence Minister, James Bezan. In Edmonton, the NDP finance critic, Nathan Cullen. And in our Toronto studio, Liberal Environment critic, John McKay. Good to see all of you. President Obama's speech last night, Mr. Bezan, had a couple details. First of all, he said that the U.S. will go after ISIS to degrade and destroy them, including airstrikes in Syria. Does Canada support that, and would they participate in that?
Well, we're doing what we've been asked to do, which is to be a member of the coalition and to concentrate our efforts in northern Iraq and an advisory non-combat role. We'll continue to do that. We definitely do believe, as President Obama has said and as Prime Minister Harper has said, that ISIL is a major threat to regional and global security, and that they do need to be stopped from not only terrorizing and persecuting and murdering innocent ethnic and religious minorities, but also from taking their terror. We have to stop them from taking their terror across the world.
But I'm trying to get clarity on the difference between Canada's joined the coalition, but the U.S. is clearly sending out different signals than Canada. So I'm just trying to make sense of the consistency here. Let me just ask you on clarity. The U.S. and the President was very specific. He said 450 troops were on the ground for the U.S. and new ones. Very specific number. Canada won't be specific about the number of Canadian troops. We say dozens and dozens. Why can they tell the exact number and we can't?
Well, because we're still doing the assessment and working along with the security forces in northern Iraq to determine what their needs are. And as I said in the show yesterday, as Minister Nicholson said at committee on Tuesday, we are still, with the four military leaders that we have on board, are doing the work of working with the military forces in the north to try to assess and analyze how we can best fit in. We are there to provide that tactical advice. We are there to provide logistic support, as we're doing already with C-17 and a Hercules aircraft and moving...
but to be fair, the question was just being specific about the number. I mean, I'm just saying, why can't Canadians know exactly how many Canadian troops are there when Americans know exactly how many American troops are there? What's the problem there?
Well, they must already have made their decisions on how many they're deploying. We still haven't got to that point, and we will be receiving that information and making those decisions in the very short term. But I can tell you that all of our military leadership that is going over there, as well as those that from various trades that are providing the counterinsurgency and counterterrorism advice, are going to be very much in a non-combat role and will be focused in northern Iraq.
Mr. Cullen, you listened to Mr. Obama last night. What did you take away from that vis-a-vis the Canadian mission?
Well, maybe I'll start with the positive first and then move over to the things that are concerning us as New Democrats, and I think Paul Dewar has done an excellent job iterating this. First of all, it's good to see from the government the emphasis on humanitarian aid and also international law and war crimes that are going on. Paul Dewar was asking about that. And it's obviously recognized by everybody worldwide just what threat is posed by such a radical and extreme group in Iraq. Where our concern comes is, in a sense, down the line of questioning that you had and we had for the defense minister at committee. How many troops and for how long? You compare that to what Mr. Obama gave to the American people in announcing the mission, to the vagueness that's coming from the Canadian government. That's worrisome for me. It's worrisome for many Canadians. I would also suggest that if we're going into Iraq with troops, we say they're non-combat role now, one could imagine mission creep and that changing at some point. This seems like an engagement that is worthy of at least a debate and a vote in Parliament. Those seem like foundational things for any modern democracy. Mr. Obama laid that out. also reached out to his Congress to talk about their engagement in the decision to deploy some of their troops into such a dangerous area. So the fact that the Conservatives won't tell Canadians how many troops, how long, while announcing a mission, it should be a cause of concern for everybody.
But Mr. Collins, speaking of vagueness, I'm trying to get from the NDP an answer on this. I know the NDP supports humanitarian aid, as do the Liberals, as do the Conservatives. Last night, President Obama said this is a fundamental threat to the U.S., and the Prime Minister has said to Canada as well, this group. Would the NDP support Canada participating in a military role over long timelines? We're talking about years. Would the NDP support a military engagement to defeat ISIS?
I think that's the very question that we want to ask ourselves and ask Canadians. I think for Canadians, the question that you just posed is an incredibly serious one. I take it serious as a parliamentarian. What we won't do is rubber stamp a mission, say yes, 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 whatever Mr. Harper would like to do, without any of those details. Either the one that's already been described as vaguely as it is, or something much larger like what you're now suggesting, which is something that of a much longer term, putting our troops in harm's way in a place like Iraq, without having Parliament and Canadians by extension know what the terms and conditions are of that engagement. It's just, that seems like a path fraught with peril, and we can't have a Prime Minister so distanced and potentially arrogant from Parliament, the people that govern this country, to say that I don't want to bring a vote, I don't want to have a debate in the House of Commons. Let's do that, put all the facts on the table, and allow the sides to make their case. If the Conservatives want to make an argument saying Canadian troops need to be deployed in Iraq on a long-term basis in a combat role, I would expect them to do that. The answers we got this week from the Defense Minister didn't add enough clarity for us as New Democrats to be able to assure ourselves.
Now, to be fair, John Baird, when he went to northern Iraq, did take the critic for the NDP and for the Liberals as they began to look at this. The question is, will there be a debate? Mr. McKay, you listened as well. What are your concerns when you measure what Mr. Obama said to what Mr. Harper said?
Well, first of all, may I say that I thought President Obama portrayed himself as a very reluctant warrior, and his reluctance is based on a lot of pretty negative experience in that part of the world. So President Obama speaks to his population, and of course he is the leader of the free world. I would join with Nathan, and I hope others, that say that before we get much further along this path, that we actually have a full debate in Parliament, that the government does lay out its game plan. Getting into these conflicts is ridiculously easy. Getting out of these conflicts is ridiculously difficult, and it's a very, very shifting terrain. Clearly we have interests. We have interests that we as a civilized nation cannot stand around and watch people being slaughtered because of their beliefs. That's number one. Number two is that we do not want the export of jihadism. But having said that, I don't detect any great appetite on the part of Canadians, nor does Mr. Trudeau, that we want to get into yet another conflict. So I think the government needs to be a little bit more forthcoming, lay its cards on the table, and recognize that this is an area where the enemy of my enemy is now my friend. For example, we are calling upon the folks in Iran to deal with ISIS. And so we have the bizarre situation of Peshmerga Kurds fighting alongside Shia Iranians who normally are mortal enemies of each other. So we in the Liberal Party be very reluctant to get involved in this latest flare-up of cross-cultural, cross-religious, cross-ethnic conflicts that just seems to be the staple of that part of the world. So without a debate, we aren't going to go there.
I mean, you're both asking for a debate, I get it, but meantime, the government has acted, Mr. McKay, because the speed at which ISIS has moved. They've now control an area the size of the UK. There's genuine concern. They were rolling through even the Kurd Peshmerga, who are supposed to be good fighters, the Iraqi army. Obama acted because of the speed at which ISIS is acting, and I recognize the need for debate. But you also have to move at the speed of the threat. given
Yeah.
the speed of the threat? Would the Liberal
Yeah,
Party
and
support a military engagement?
And I think President Obama acted appropriately in supporting the Peshmerga and the other fighters to stop that threat. You can't sit around, twiddle your thumbs, waiting for them to stop doing what they're doing. Having said that, that doesn't follow that Canadians, as an independent nation, would get involved in this kind of a conflict. We do need to protect those religious minorities that were being slaughtered, whether it's in the form of refugee repatriation or whether it's in the form of direct aid. That's fine. That's good. And containing the threats of the jihadists, that's fine. That's good. But you don't want to get much further along unless the government lays its information on the table, because this is a conflict that is fraught with immense difficulties. And I, for one, would be very reluctant to see our troops engage. Not only do Canadians need to know, but our soldiers who are there. We have elite soldiers that are there. They're not there to play ring around a rosy.
All right, Mr. Bezan, last question to you. I mean, clearly the opposition parties want two things. They want clarity of mission, and I know you asked that at committee. What is the goal of this? What is the objective of this? The Canadian timelines of 30-day assessments and the American timeline of 3 years are wildly out of whack. The goals of helping the Peshmerga versus defeating ISIS also seem very different. Is a parliamentary debate the next step?
We are going to have debate, and we already did, because the House isn't sitting yet. It starts sitting on Monday. We had a special meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee where we were able to have some of that clarity and discussion with Ministers Baird and Nicholson. And we're going to be back in the session on Monday.
But the fear is that you're already in, though. I mean, I get it, but men and women are already in harm's way. We're already in Iraq. I mean, so the mission started. So I guess the fear is easy in, hard out. Where does it go?
And that's why we have the 30-day timeline on this. And yeah, President Obama talks 3 years, but he's also not committing troops to the ground either. He's talking about airstrikes. He's talking about military advisors. And so we're providing military advisors right now, working alongside Iraqi security forces in the north. And we'll continue to evaluate and assess and have these discussions with our parliamentary colleagues when we get back in the session on Monday.
I got to leave it there. On Skype from Toronto, Parliamentary Secretary to the Defence Minister James Bezan, and Edmonton NDP finance critic Nathan Cullen, and in Toronto, Liberal environment critic John McKay. Those two will be back later in the program. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.